And now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at a Kickstarter preview of a game that's got its campaign up and running. We're going to take a look at Shindig Machine by Travesty Games. Now inside of this box is a deck of cards, and on these cards are images. And these images are going to be used as a storytelling tool. So you're going to be using this deck of cards to tell various different stories, be it about your superpower and your weakness, or your excuse to get away from the cops, or just weaving a tale. And there's 14 included different rule sets for 14 different games that you can play with this deck of cards. So real quick, why don't we take a look at what you get inside of this box, and we'll see how some of the various different games play, and then we'll come back and I'll sum it all up for you at the end. So here you can see the deck of cards for Shindig Machine. Now this is a deck of cards that's going to be a storytelling aid from which they have provided a various assortment of rules or different types of games that you can play with this deck. So they've got the deck of cards, they're going to have pictures on it, and this is some of the assorted pictures, we'll go over them shortly. But with these pictures, you're going to be able to play different games that they've written in the rules. These games range from easy games to very challenging games. Easy being games that don't require a whole lot of interaction between players. You're going to play a card and describe that card, whereas more challenging games or medium games might require you to link your card to one or two other cards. And challenging or very challenging games are going to require you to integrate your cards into a story or to build upon a story by playing a new card or replacing another card. So basically the idea here is that they have all of these different games, and you're going to use all of these cards as a tool to play those games. So some of the games, for example, might be called like Superpower, where everybody's dealt some cards, and going around the table, you get to play a card to the table where you get to describe your superpower. So maybe you get this card, and it's going to be difficult sometimes to describe a superpower. So we see here we have a newscaster on Channel 5, and maybe this guy's superpower is that he actually already knows the news before it happens. So he's the world's best newscaster. I play this to the table, and I describe my superpower as having the power of foresight. I can tell what's going to happen before it happens and be there when it does happen, right on the scene, always available to take the news. So that might be one game. And you can go around the table kind of coming up with interesting stories based on these cards. And as I said, they're not always the most easy things to come up with. This one looks like a guy who's dropping an ice cream cone. So maybe his power is the power of levitation. He's dropping this ice cream cone, but we see that it's still there. So he can make his ice cream levitate, and he's still okay. Oops, I dropped it, but it's all right. I saved it. So that's one possible game, and that's one of the easier ones. Another one is called Kill Survive. And you're going to use this same deck. Each player is going to have cards, and one player is going to describe how they might kill another player. So we can see, for example, this card here. We have this lady with 3 eyes, and maybe she has this central eye, which has the power to look at someone and instantly cause their death. And the player that they're targeting with this card would play a card from their hand. And they would say, okay, well, that's all great and well, but, you know, I am going to knock you out and use my surgical prowess to remove your 3rd eye, negating that power, and you won't be able to kill me. And then that player would become the person who gets to play a card from their hand, targeting someone else to be killed, and that person would respond likewise with a card. So those are some of the easy games. Now they get into a little bit more difficult games, things like Diagnosis, where one person will play a card and describe a disease they have. And each player will in turn describe the way that they would diagnose that disease. So you come up with symptoms, you're like, I have these really sharp, jagged teeth, and that's my problem. And everybody around the table would play a card describing what they think the problem is. So for example, somebody might play this trident and say, well, the actual issue isn't that you have a disease at all, but it's that you're a mythological creature. You are actually an undersea creature, some type of hybrid, and that is why you have these sharp, pointy teeth. And you go around the table making these diagnoses in turn order. Or you might have one where it's reinterpret, where everybody plays a card, or actually one card gets played to the center of the table. And this can be kind of interesting to do after you've played through the cards quite a bit. So this one's kind of hard to interpret, but you can see we have this kind of jumbled picture. I'm not even sure exactly what it is, but each player, in turn order, would interpret what this card means to them. And this is an interesting way to go about things once you've played the game several times, because you're going to come to a point where you see a card and you automatically associate that card with something that either you've described before or with what it depicts. This forces you to look at the things in a different light. Each player will describe what they see in this card, and you have to offer a different interpretation. So, as you go around, this is a way to refresh the way you look at the cards. Some of the more challenging games are going to be things like Pitch Session. So Pitch Session is a situation where each player is going to, well, one player is going to get 5 cards. And they're going to take those 5 cards, and they're going to describe a movie plot with them. So for example, let me flip these 5 cards out here. So we see I have this weird conglomeration of cards. So maybe with this set of cards I say, all right, well there's a diabolical plan for the advancement of mankind. We see here that we have the plan written out. We have a drawing of a man, and someone is planning to advance the capabilities of man so that they can better dominate the world. But you know, the animal lovers, PETA, don't agree with this. So PETA says, no, we're not okay with this. We want to protect the animals, and the advancement of man is bad for the animals. So what do? Well, they say, if we do this, it's going to destroy nature. The swords and the weapons and everything that's created is going to harm nature. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to send out a man, and we are going to blow up the headquarters for the advancement of man. And so this is our movie plot. This is what's going to happen in our movie. It doesn't describe everything, but that's the general basis for our movie. And from that point on, each player is going to play a card that's going to replace something in this movie plot and re-describe the movie plot, either changing the whole thing or just changing one aspect. So for example, maybe the next player draws this train. And they say, well, they don't send a man to blow things up. They actually drive a train into the headquarters for the advancement of man. So it's a minor plot change, but, you know, it still changes the plot of the movie. And then each player sequentially would make some type of change, either changing the whole plot, changing a little part, doesn't matter, but it's the creativity of the idea that drives the game. And so that's a little bit more complicated aspect, and there's a similar one where you describe a lie that you're telling to the cops, but then people present evidence against you that you have to use to adjust your description of what's going on. The most complicated games are things like Eulogy or the big game. Now, Eulogy is one in which one player will be dead, and each player is going to use a card to describe something about that person's life. So maybe the first person is describing the player's early life, and they say, you know, when they were really young, I should say, the player had a fascination with subways. They really loved to go to subways. Not the restaurant, the actual underground trains. So they have a fascination with underground trains. And then in their middle life, you know, they actually had a fascination with whales. They really loved fantasy novels. They loved interesting concepts. And you can see here that they actually drew this interesting picture of a whale with a city on its back. And you're going to keep describing this person's life, going from young to middle age to adult, then to how they died, and finally on to what your greatest memory of them is. So everybody's going to describe this person, the dead person, with their cards, trying to come up with an interesting story that tells out this person's life. The final game, which is called the big game, is a huge storytelling endeavor, where each player is going to have a hand of cards, and you're going to start by flipping a card out to the center of the table. And each player will be able to play a card off of this card, building on the story. So we'll, you know, try and link these two cards. And you can play them above, below, left, right. But as you play them, they're going to form a web. So we'll see here that this card is directly related to this card, but it may not be related to the whale with the city on its back. But if I play a card here, the train, it's related to both the whale and to the man with the remote. So now I need to figure out how this train fits into both the stories of the man with the remote and the whale with the city on its back. And as you play more and more cards, you're going to have a more and more intricate web of how the cards relate, and you're going to be trying to create an interesting story from all of those cards with the side stories that are built upon it. So as you can see, there's a lot you can do with this deck of cards. Why don't we go back and I will sum it all up for you. Well, there you have it. That is Shindig Machine by Travesty Games, an interesting storytelling tool along the lines of games like Diggs-It, where you need to use your imagination in order to drive the fun. Now, they've helped you along by including 14 different scenarios, so there's 14 different games you can play, and amongst those, I think anybody can find a game that they'd like to try. So maybe you're not into the whole superpower thing, but you do like the idea of creating your own movie and, you know, altering the plot amongst your friends in order to have some fun with that. And so I think the imagination is really going to drive the fun here, and I think that's a very interesting concept, but the fact that they've included so many different variants is really going to carry you along. Now, I've only showed you a deck of 50 cards. The final product is going to come with 108, so there will be even more variety to fuel your imagination. The inclusion of the scenario that helps you to envision new ideas for the cards once you get stuck in that rut, I think is a very cool idea. But if any of this sounds interesting to you, I suggest you check out their Kickstarter page, see what they have to offer, and perhaps even pledge.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.